Hi, I'm Andy Lester and I'm the Head of Conservation for A Rocha UK, and welcome to a tree planting video where we're going to be looking at a creative tree planting technique that is both great for big and small spaces and great for climate resilience. So welcome to a very warm Cumbria. It's middle of April, it already feels like the middle of the summer, and that's a really good introduction to why we're here today. We're looking at climate resilient tree planting, and today we're going to be talking about a really fun technique called the Miyawaki method, which was developed by a Japanese scientist over 40 years ago. And so we're going to take you on the process from prepping ground all the way through to planting trees, when to do it, how to do it, and hopefully you'll find it useful. But why? Well, climate change is happening at speed, and we need to get trees in the ground as quickly as possible to grow as fast as possible. So as a conservationist, I've been planting trees in the kind of normal fashion for the last 20 years, and typically when you have a metre square, that's a metre square with grids on it, that's another metre square without the grids on it, you'll plant probably no more than one tree per square. The challenge with that is it can take 30, 40 years for the tree to grow to any reasonable height, and we're interested in the trees sequestering carbon, and they won't start to do that for the first 30 to 40 years. So the Japanese scientists who came up with the Miyawaki method thought that actually if we plant trees in much closer proximity to each other, they will increase their ability to compete, both with soil nutrients and with light. And what we've found is that using a technique of planting more trees of different heights in a small area, you're able to grow trees much faster and more competitively. They compete for soil moisture and nutrients, they compete in terms of light and height. And as a result, you start to emulate a forest system much quicker and much more effectively. So in a typical forest system, a native forest system, you have 5 to 7 layers. And for the planting that we're doing, we're focusing on a 5-layer system. It's going to take you through it because this is the sort of thing that we would encourage you to aim at. I would also hasten to add that if you're dealing with very small sites, then it pays to possibly remove from the system the largest of the trees, and we'll come back to that in a second as to why. So I'm going to start with the largest because we've got a big area. We have an oak tree and we're going to be planting a number of oaks across the site. So that's a canopy tree, and you can expect that to grow to a good height within the first 60 years or so. Faster growing, slightly shorter, but still an impressive tree is field maple. It's great for wildlife, it's excellent on a range of different soils, and as with all tree planting, by the time you get to April, you want it, that's the latest you want stuff to be in the ground in the north of England. You're looking at probably the middle of March if you're further south. The third one, hazel and then rowan. So hazel grows to about 15-20 metres. It's a lot smaller than the field maple. It's a mid-layer tree. It's excellent for insects, and it's a very good species for growing on quite clayey, on soils that you can't use for much else. It's quite a resilient little tree. Likewise for rowan, smaller still, typically 10 metres maximum height, a berry producer, a flower producer, and a great pollinator. And then right down at the bottom, our sort of lower shrub layer, we're going for dog rose. Again, very versatile in many different soil types. So you can adapt your trees to your location. These are species that we know will do quite well here in the north of England. So ultimately what we're aiming at is planting up every square with a mixture of different heights to emulate a forest system. So the Miyawaki method, we're looking at 5 trees in this first square metre, but there's also 5 stages, and the first stage is preparing the ground. So we're going to take you through that preparation process. Starting point is to break up the soil. Make sure you've got somewhere that isn't too stony, and you can tell that as you put the spade in, it will go in nicely. You know there's a reasonable moisture content. And then what we're doing is we're lifting up the blocks. So you're putting them into squares to get easier to turn it over. And then to start with, we're going to lift those squares out. So the beginning of the planting process is now to break up the blocks. Make sure you've got a pretty sharp spade, and that enables you to go through the centre and break it into roughly 3 or 4 inch square pieces. It doesn't matter being precise, but the thing to remember is you've got to get all that back in the ground with the trees. So once you've broken that up, you are then ready for the next stage, which is getting the trees in the ground. We'll dominate most of the holes with the intermediate species and the smaller scrubby species, and every 3 or 4 metre squares we'll put in the field maple or oak, because obviously they are the larger trees, and if you put in too many of those, then the smaller ones won't get a chance. But for this first one, we're putting in 5 trees, and we're going to start with one of the larger ones, the field maple. Now, we've made the hole so that it is uneven. It's got deeper areas and shallower areas, and that's quite deliberate. With the field maple, this has already got quite a good root structure, and so the plan with this is to put it into the deeper area and make sure that the roots are well buried, and you have got at least 1 inch to 1.5 inches above the roots that you can then cover with soil. Now the key then is to get your blocks, reduced blocks of soil, and to very gently, don't squash it, break it up further and put it around your plant. So as I said, the key there is not too densely packed. Give the root space time to breathe. And there we have our first tree in. Remove any dead bits as well, and check that we've got it relatively straight, and we'll then start working on planting the rest. So with the smaller species, you are planting them at a more shallow depth, so we've put some extra soil back in. And again with these, it's slightly different. You've got a natural plug, and you're effectively planting to the top of the plug. So we're going to go for that. Again, we're going to go into one of the corners and just loosely put the soil and the mulch that we've got out of the hole directly around it. So before we go into looking at how to protect our trees, we're just going to heel the trees in. This is about being pretty gentle because you don't want to damage the roots. Use the back of your shoe or Wellington boot and just gently go around each tree with the heel, making sure that obviously you don't bump into the tree itself. Now the reason for doing this is to protect against late frost. It helps to fill in the air pockets on the surface and gives the tree the best chance of survival. So stage 4, we've got the trees in the ground, is now thinking about protection for them. We're in an area where there are not many deer and there are not many rabbits, and so my primary concern is making sure that the larger trees, the ones that are probably highest risk from the odd deer, and so we'll be protecting them. There's 2 different techniques you can use, particularly if you've got areas where there are a lot of potential predators for your trees, herbivores that want to munch their way through your young rowans and hazel. The first is to fence the whole area off, but that can be really expensive and costly. The alternative is to put stakes in the ground and tree guards, and obviously the tree guards are at different lengths depending on the tree you're planting. So I'm just going to demonstrate the tree guards on the field maple we've got here. The first is don't go too close to the tree because you might damage the roots. Feel your way gently in. If you meet a lot of resistance, then take the pole back out and put it in. And then make sure that you go low enough so that in the event of a pretty strong wind, you know it's going to be pretty robust and hang on. Now there are 2 things that you can do with the ties. One, you can tie straight between the tree and the cane. I prefer with smaller trees to put the guards on first, so as with the wind resistance you don't end up with chafing and rubbing. And there's lots of different ties you can use. I'm using a recycled tie, and these are much more suitable to go on the outside of the spiral guard. If you're going on the inside, you go for something a bit broader. So undo the tie from the base, and spread that out ready, and then go for the spiral guard, and it just unravels. Always to go from the bottom of the tree, winding it up, making sure you don't damage the buds en route. So go gently, take your time, and make sure the base particularly is well covered, because that's often where the deer will go in from and the rabbits, and again cover any shoots at the top. So with these I tie midway. I'll double knot them, and there we have the guard in place. Now with the smaller trees you can use smaller guards, and again that's rather dependent on how many deer, rabbits and other predators you've got around. In this case, because we know we don't have many, we're going to leave those unguarded, but we'll also be putting a protection on our lovely little oak tree there as well. And as I said, if you can get recycled products, much the best way of doing it, and then you've not got lots of plastic that you have to recycle after. So we're on to stage 5. Many of you will be thinking, we've planted the trees, they're in the ground, surely that's it. The challenging bit is always keeping the trees going for the first year or two, and so that's all dependent on weather conditions, on your predators, and on what the soil's doing. So the best advice I can give you is every 2 or 3 weeks from when you've planted, say in early March onwards, go back and check your trees. If you've got extended periods of dry weather, use a watering can, but use it with the sprinkler on the end. You don't want to be firing large amounts of water like a tap onto it, because you can break up the soil. So very gently water from standing height across your trees every couple of weeks. If you get a lot of rain, then you don't need to worry too much. The second aspect is keeping an eye out for problem species like your rabbits. And so if you've not put guards on all the trees and you find that your smaller plants are being nibbled at the tips, then it's well worth going and purchasing a guard. And that way you can keep an eye on the trees for the first year to 2 years. The second stage is the weeding. And you'll have noticed right at the beginning of the first part of the video, we were planting into ground that we were having to turn over because it had a lot of grass and rushes and reeds in already. They are going to try and come back, and you need to keep them low. And now you can pull out the hardier weeds by hand. The alternative is to have a strimmer and very gently with a very small strimmer blade strim around them, but there's always the risk you're cutting them. So what I tend to do is I tend to weed by hand for the first year or two just to keep it under control. So we've taken you through the Miyawaki technique. We've planted 5 trees to start this area off, and over the course of the next few weeks we're going to be working with a team of volunteers to get another 500 or so trees in the ground. But as you see, because we're in quite a small area, 500 trees is not going to go very far. So the challenge with this technique is you need quite a lot of trees for quite a small area. But the expectation is that within many of our lifetimes, we will have an amazing bit of woodland grow up as the trees talk to each other and compete for space, light and nutrients. It'll be fascinating to see what happens. And A Rocha UK is absolutely committed to protecting habitats and species that are in decline for nature, and we thoroughly enjoy being able to produce this video to explain one creative technique and one way of doing that. And of course, if you want to find out more about A Rocha UK, about our conservation work, about our work with churches, then do go on to our website, which is www.arocha.org.uk, where you can find out more about our work, about our conservation, about our practical action and our work with partners around the country.